Veterans in our region endured some of the longest wait times in the nation. Some Mountain Home VA Medical Center employees are accused of abusing, disrespecting, and refusing to help some patients.
After nearly a year of investigation, community watchdog Nate Morabito discovered many of the employees disciplined by the Veterans Hospital kept their jobs.
That is right. Congressman Phil Roe calls our findings unacceptable. He says Congress needs to act. We've spent 11 months filing Freedom of Information requests, reviewing federal disciplinary records, and demanding answers.
Push.
This is Angela Region's happy place.
All right, Miriam, a good job.
Inside a gym she owns, watching her daughter
She's here 18 hours a week.
practice.
All right. That was awesome.
Far removed from her time serving
I didn't like it there.
during Desert Storm. No camo, no guns, no war.
Good.
Only leotards,
Ooh, keep your hips.
balance beams, and peace. But amid all of this joy, there's something bothering this Army veteran.
Absolutely, hands down, the best health care should go to the veterans. And that's not happening.
Region says she experienced multiple delays earlier this year trying to schedule appointments outside the VA through third-party administrator TriWest.
And that's when they found the cancer.
After doctors diagnosed her with breast cancer, first to see a specialist, then for physical therapy.
It took 6 weeks to get it. And that was calling constantly.
Region says all of that waiting eventually led to complications.
I had to go back in for another surgery.
We discovered delayed care isn't the only thing veterans have experienced. Some have come face to face with complete disregard, disrespect, and even abuse.
I think that's terrible.
Records show from January 2014 through the end of 2015, Mountain Home disciplined roughly 150 employees. The VA fired almost half of those people and issued letters of disapproval, reprimands, and suspensions to the rest. We don't know the specifics of all of those cases. Instead, only very few of them, because the VA made it difficult to collect that information. But the documents we did obtain,
and they just need to work for somebody else. They don't need to be serving veterans.
Left Congressman Phil Roe convinced the VA should have fired more employees.
That's unacceptable. And if you were working in the private sector, Nate should be fired.
He's talking about substantiated abuse cases from late last year. Records show when a veteran asked for water, a nursing employee repeatedly refused to give it to him. The VA gave the employee a 3-day suspension.
He probably laid out there in a ditch somewhere and freezing to death in Germany, 70 years ago, freezing his back end off with no water or food or anything else. I want him to have it as quick as he can open his mouth. I want him to have water.
Another nursing employee received a 2-day suspension after mocking a World War II veteran, refusing to open the patient's food even though the man couldn't use his left arm, and refusing to help the man get off the toilet, walking away and telling him, "You can wait a while."
If that's your attitude that you just read to me, you need to be gone.
A third nursing service employee received a 3-day suspension after taking a veteran's food away before he was finished eating. And when the patient threw a coffee cup in his direction, he said, "What in the hell is wrong with you? I didn't know I was taking care of a 2-year-old. Documents call all 3 employees' actions first-time offenses. Over in the business office, records show an operator who scheduled appointments was rude to a patient who wanted to speak with his cancer doctor and then essentially hung up on him. A month later, records show that same employee didn't answer a single call over a 3-day period, even though the call center received more than 2,500 calls during that time. Despite previous customer complaints, the VA only reprimanded him. 2 months later, documents suggest the VA investigated the same employee for again being rude and discourteous, this time to 4 other patients who called needing help. The employee hung up on all of those patients. His punishment this time, a 14-day suspension, an attempt to give the employee a chance to improve his behavior. Mountain Home finally fired him late last year, this time after he acted disrespectful to a supervisor and coworker. In another case, a police service dispatch employee failed to show up to work for 41 days. Mountain Home suspended him without pay for 2 weeks. Then there's the case of a doctor who admitted to the inappropriate touching of women he worked alongside, kissing one on the top of her head and rubbing the shoulders of her and other nurses. After initially suspending him, the VA chose to rescind a 5-day suspension and instead gave him an official letter of disapproval. That came after the physician, with the help of his union representative, signed a settlement agreement, a deal that prevented him from securing any new jobs at the VA for 5 years and removed all mentions of his suspension from his personnel file.
Do you feel like overall you all have handled discipline appropriately?
I believe that we handle discipline appropriately.
Mountain Home's then acting director, Dan Snyder, says the VA relies on a progressive table of penalties for all cases.
It's not to punish people, but to change their behaviors.
That takes into account the seriousness of the act and the employee's history.
They don't continue to work here if their behavior doesn't change.
Snyder says overall, the number of employees who misbehave is small, but he knows those rare cases include some egregious ones.
I just have to say I'm very disappointed any time that there's a situation that's like that, especially where a patient's abused in any way, disrespected.
Snyder says Mountain Home's goal is to treat veterans like heroes and give them the care they've earned.
Anything short of that is a disappointment, and as you've seen in the record, we deal with it harshly.
A 3-day suspension, some people may say, that doesn't sound harsh to me.
Someone that has earned a 3-day suspension will likely earn a separation next time something happens.
I do think that some people may see this abuse case involving those 3 people and say, 3 days just doesn't seem like a lot. What would you say to that?
Well, you know, I'm aware of the specifics of the cases as well as you are, and it is characterized as abuse, but it was some verbal abuse.
The VA needs to be more accountable, and they need to be more responsive, and some of it's not their fault.
Congressman Rowe understands Mountain Home is at the mercy of its progressive discipline policy. That's why he and the majority of U.S. representatives passed bipartisan reform in September, aimed at improving accountability and speeding up the disciplinary process. It's now in the hands of the Senate.
The VA administration needs a way to quickly get rid of those bad apples.
Angela Region agrees it's time for more accountability.
Come on, baby.
But don't get her wrong.
I'm very grateful for the VA.
She appreciates all of the good employees. Thanks to VA Care, she's sitting here today as a cancer-free mother.
She doesn't even have to see me lose my hair or be sick. And that's an incredible blessing.
And lower.
Who can smile
Good.
as she watches her daughter grow into quite the gymnast.
Oh, that was gorgeous.
I spoke with Mountain Home's current acting director just days ago. Dr. David Hecht told me he's not aware of any injuries to the veterans in those 3 separate abuse cases and says the employees haven't had any problems since. He told me all allegations like this are swiftly and thoroughly investigated. Dr. Hecht added the 3 employees involved make up less than 0.1% of all employees.
Nate Morabito, thank you. 1/3 of the VA's employees are veterans. Employees are also members of a union, which often gets involved in disciplinary cases. Union President Mary Sipple told us VA management is rarely held to the same standard as employees, often receiving counseling or relocation instead of facing discipline, adding, quote, the VA moves their problems around. They do not deal with them, end quote. The legislation aimed at improving accountability would open the door for more executive-level punishment.